Welcome, everyone. Welcome so much to our film talk tonight. We're just waiting for everyone to finish entering the waiting room. We are so thrilled to have you here. Welcome to JCC Sonoma County's Filmmaker Talk. Today, we are going to be talking about The New Jew, which is a fabulous 4-part documentary series. And the series creator, who is actually also the lead researcher and editor and has an incredible slew of titles. That's Moshe Samuels, who is talking to us, I believe, from New York at the moment. We will get started in just a moment. But first, I want to first welcome. The Jewish Film Festival has been going on for about 2 weeks now, and so there are about 2 weeks left. And we're thrilled that most of you are season pass holders and are so incredibly thrilled to have your support, and we hope that you are enjoying all of the films. So without further ado, before we introduce Moshe and take all of his questions, I would like to introduce to you Matan Zamir. And Matan comes to us, he is the Deputy Consul coming from the Israeli Consulate here in San Francisco. And they are generous co-sponsors of this event. And Matan, welcome. Please feel free to say a few words. And I will now unmute you.
Thank you. The most common sentence that we all said this over the past year and a half is please unmute me, or you're not unmuted, or you're muted. So thank you. Thank you, Irene, for hosting this. Thank you for organizing the Sonoma Jewish Film Festival. I'll speak on behalf of the consulate, and I'll say that it is a pleasure for us to partner with you every year. We'll continue to do so. You're doing a great work bringing Israeli culture to the beautiful Sonoma Valley. I'm sure you're gonna ask Moshe at some point if he ever visited Sonoma Valley, and if he has, which wineries you get to that, because you guys, you're part of a very beautiful part of the world. I wanna say also thank you to Scott, who I had the pleasure to meet earlier this week, for his role in the festival and for the team of the JCC in general. Because you didn't come to hear me, I'll just say one thing about The New Jew that I've and I'm sure you're going to talk about it, that my feedback from the mini-series is that, you know, how we all talk about, like, especially us at the consulate, it's important to bring Israel to the American Jewry and to bring different angles of the Israeli life and the Israeli society and Israeli culture to the American Jewry. This series does that, and it presents American Jewry to you guys because you're watching it and you're enjoying it, but it's as important to bring American Jewry to people in Israel. You'll be surprised how few or how less or how little Israelis know on the diversity of the American Jewish community. Just one example, when I was in Boston before here, we took a delegation of Knesset members, like parliamentarians, like leaders of the Israeli society. We brought them to Boston, and out of 6 of them, 4 said they've never stepped in a Reform synagogue in their lives. So that's just one example. So this miniseries that was showcased in Cannes 11, or one of the most prominent TV channels in Israel, does that big time. The diversity is shown in it, and it's as important as looking at the mirror for the American Jewry to show it to the Israelis, and the Israelis to learn what's the amazing community that's living and thriving here. So thank you, Moshe, for doing that. And one more time, thank you, Irene, for your team at the JCC for hosting the festival and hosting this program in particular. And let's start the program.
Thank you so much, Matan. I really appreciate your being here and for all of your support. I just wanted to very quickly acknowledge Scott Brockman, our new executive director, who is here. Hello, Scott.
Hi, I just want to say just give me a minute to give warm greetings to everybody. Aren, first of all, deserves a round of applause for this incredible film festival that we are halfway through, so we can hear the hands clapping from here. I'd like to thank Moshe for being here and Matan also for being here. And I want to introduce myself because I see a lot of new faces that I haven't seen. And I look forward to, in the coming months and the weeks and days, of getting to know you and getting to know the community better and building and strengthening our community together. So thank you so much for being here. And Aren, it's your show.
Oh, thank you so much, Scott. I do want to acknowledge, of course, all of the guests. We have a really nice turnout here tonight. And so many of you are actually sponsors and dedicated community members. And we have film committee members here. I don't know if all of you know that we have a selection committee, a really wonderful one that works so dedicated all throughout the year. And they saw the new Jew and they rated it highly. And we fought so hard to have it here and to make it happen. So thank you to the film committee. Ask me about the film committee, about joining the committee anytime you'd like. And without further ado, Moshe, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I wanted to just very briefly introduce you to everyone here. Moshe Samuels, the creator of this incredible project. I'm reading your bio just so that they know. You call yourself a professional Jew with extensive experience as an emissary and educator in Israel and the United States. And in recent years, you were a CEO of Shazul, or Interwoven, an organization founded to introduce Israelis to contemporary Jewish life and help bridge the growing gap between the two epicenters of the Jewish world. And this and your travels influenced how this series came together, I believe. So I, just so you know, everybody here, have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm here to take your questions. So if you want, anytime you'd like, start typing them in the chat. I will review them. But I will get started here and prompt you with some of my own questions. The new Jew, we have all seen it or will see it. Everybody on this call has either seen it or will see it. And it's this wonderful, I think of it as a road trip, this road trip of discovery across America. And it has the wonderful comedian and actor Guri Alfi discovering the cultural and political influence of Jewish Americans. We meet so many different types of people, Jews of color, interfaith relationships, people who have converted, a bar mitzvah in the Rocky Mountains, farms, just crazy, amazing things and going all across the country. So it's very entertaining and it really explores this concept of Americans being Jews by choice. I loved it. I found it to be very moving. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how that, I guess, created, what is the genesis of the project? I'm sure you've got your boilerplate, but I'd love to know, how did it start?
Thank you. So a little bit of myself. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, moved to Israel when I was 3 years old. And like many children of immigrants, this is not something unique to American immigrants to Israel, but like many children of immigrants, I kind of felt a little ashamed of my American heritage. And I didn't really feel as if I'm at home at Israel. And I didn't really feel like I'm in America. I kind of felt like an outsider in both cultures for a long, long time. And the first time I actually felt as like I was a real Israeli was when I was sent after my army service, like many Israelis, to a Jewish summer camp in North America through the Jewish Agency. And suddenly I was representing Israel. I was the Israeli shaliach, the emissary. And that's the first time that I was accepted as the Israeli and not as the American. Up until that point, I was always the American in my group of friends. And I decided that I liked that. It was very complimenting. And it's kind of like started a whole career as a professional emissary, bridging the gap between these two communities, mostly doing Israel education for North American Jews, be it in America or in Israel, in various Israel programs that I staffed and later on ran. And between 2015 and 2019, I was on another gig, another shlichut, another emissary gig in the Upper West Side in New York. And those years featured a lot of low points in the relationship between American Jews and Israel. I'm not going to name all of them, but I think you all recall those moments. And I felt like this escalation in our relationship, it's easy to point a finger and say, oh, the other side, why don't they understand us? But the reality is that Israelis know very little about Jewish life in America, care very little about Jewish life in America, and respect very little about Jewish life in America. And that was something that I felt I need to change. I felt that this is a two-way street. And after so many years of investing in doing Israel education for American Jews, I felt like my next stage in my career was to do, to educate Israelis about Jewish life in America and serve as a living bridge to the other direction. So as I said in your introduction of reading my bio, I started a nonprofit which brings Israeli leaders from Israel to North America for like what we might want to call a reverse birthright type of experience. It's their first encounter with American Jewish life. They meet with all the Jewish leaders in New York City. They go to all these amazing demonstrations of Jewishness, the most hip synagogues and the best kosher Jewish restaurants and whatnot. And hopefully they go back home and they have like, a change of mind, like, oh, we actually care about these Jews. We want to know more. We want to bring them to our communities. We want to change policy. And I've been doing that for the last 3 years. But in addition, I felt like that's just the tip of the iceberg, and it takes a long time for this type of process to sink, to eventually impact the entire Israeli society. And so I thought to myself, how do I reach a critical mass of Israelis and bring the narrative of American Jews into every living room in Israel? And the best way to do that is mass media. And so I was able to pitch this show to Guri Alfi, the comedian that's the lead of the series. In 2018, he was spending a year in Los Angeles. He was trying his luck in Hollywood. He failed. He's happy to talk about it. But one thing that did happen to him is like what happens to many, many Israelis when they spend a substantial amount of time with America, is that they start asking themselves questions about their Jewish identity. Like, what does it mean to be Jewish outside of Israel? I'm used to just being Jewish by default. I'm used to not thinking about it. I don't ever have to make any effort. And suddenly he moved to America with his 4 daughters. What kind of education am I giving them at home? What kind of practices are we going to be doing? Do I go to synagogue? Do I not go to synagogue? Do I send them to a youth movement or not? All these interesting questions that he never asked before. And I met him at this critical moment in time, and I was able to pitch the series to him, and he loved it. Like, it really was like the perfect timing for him. And he said, let's do it. And from there, we just took it to the network. They love this idea as well. It's the first time that a TV show about American Jews has been made on Israeli TV in 26 years. Just goes to show you how little.
Wow. You mean that there's not been anything in Israeli television about American Jews?
About diaspora Jewry in general, very little. When Israelis talk about Jews living outside of Israel, it's usually to reinforce a certain perception that they have. So they like to talk about anti-Semitism abroad because that justifies the existence of the state of Israel. They like to talk about, assimilation because, okay, that's happening right now, right? And therefore it's good that we have our own state and we only interact with ourselves. So like all of these types of topics that kind of strengthen this concept of negation of the diaspora, that Jewish life could only happen in Israel in an authentic and deep and rich way. That's when Israelis like to talk about American Jewry, is usually as a victim or as of one of those two things. And so we try to create a show that presents American Jewish life in all of its diversity and richness and in a positive light, with a lot of respect and a lot of love, not necessarily with agreement, not necessarily with, we're not trying to tell Israelis that they need to become American Jews, that they have to become liberal, progressive in some issues, all become reform or conservative. Like, that was definitely not the goal of the series, but just to understand that there are Jews that have a very different way of expressing their Judaism, and it's just as legitimate and just as rich as we have in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Now, so many questions, but I guess that the first question I wanted to ask, and I thought I'd ask it at the end, but how was the series received in Israel? Yeah. I mean, I watch it as a person who was actually very similar to you in being half Israeli, half American, and sort of spent a lot of time in both places. I get those questions really, really ingrained. And I thought that this would be wonderful for us to see here in the States, because it tells our story about ourselves and how great that is. But what did people like it? Did they watch it? What did they tell you?
Yeah, so actually we were surprised, we were blown away by the success of the show. First of all, I got wonderful press, really, literally across the entire spectrum of Israeli press, which means that basically throughout the entire spectrum of Israeli politics, because Israeli press is very political and very affiliated with political parties and whatnot. And we, anywhere from Haaretz, which there was a huge conversation there back and forth on the different op-eds around the show, there's a lot of criticism. It started off with the criticism about the show is too Jewish. Like, what do we have to do with all this Judaism? We're Israeli, we're not Jews. We're something totally different. These American Jews have nothing to do with us. We don't share a common destiny or common future. We're something totally different. And what does Israeli taxpayer money have to go on creating a TV show about these American Jews that are so foreign to us and so, and the other end of the spectrum, we saw in the more right-wing Orthodox newspapers some criticism about like too many reform liberal American Jews in the show. Like, why are we giving a stage to all these reform rabbis, right? Why is this? But that generated a lot of really interesting conversations among Israeli society and Israeli press, and that's really, really wonderful. When it comes to the public. And by the way, the TV critics all loved it. Like, it got wonderful criticism from the TV critics, but on the op-eds, it really generated really fascinating conversations.
Do you think you changed the minds?
Yeah, so when it comes to the Israeli public, it's really interesting. So we know that there are over 400,000 households that watch the show, which is really crazy for an Israeli documentary. It's not something that's taken for granted. Documentaries don't usually get that rating. We were aired on primetime television, 9:30 p.m., which is wonderful, mostly because of our host, Guli, which is a very well-known Israeli comedian. And we get stopped on the street all the time by people who are telling us how much the show impacted them. Guli likes to tell different anecdotes, about comedian friends of his that watch the show thinking that it's going to be something that's, we're going to laugh about American Jews. It's going to be like a Sacha Baron Cohen style type show, and actually discovered that something very, very different, right? It's very emotional, it's very personal, and it touched them in very deep ways. And Gui tells about all these friends of his that, a comedian friend of his that after watching this show said, these American Jews, are choosing their Judaism and are proactive about it and know so much more than I do. How could that happen? I need to start making choices in my life and how I want to raise my kids when it comes to their Judaism. And he went out and he bought a siddur for the first time in his life. And he started doing Kiddush on a Friday night. And we're hearing many stories like that from the secular end of the spectrum of Israeli society. And that was something we were actually, like, that was like the goal. And that makes a lot of sense to me. What's surprising is that we got a lot of positive feedback from ultra-Orthodox Jews, so Haredi Jews in Israel, which also watched the show and thought it was wonderful. So this is public television. They're able to stream this on their YouTube, on their smartphones. They don't have to own a TV set in order to see the show. And this is a title of a show that has the word Jewish in it. So they thought, oh, let's watch it. It's probably an interesting show for us to watch as observant Jews. And this was really for them a first encounter with pluralistic liberal Judaism in America. And I get stopped, I live in Jerusalem, I get stopped all the time by ultra-Orthodox Jews that recognize me from the show and say wonderful things about it. So it's really interesting to see the spectrum of Israelis. I think it definitely is helping to generate a better understanding and appreciation of Jewish life in America by all, we know that this show right now, just because we're invited as well, but teachers are using the series in the formal education system to talk about Jewish peoplehood and Jewish life abroad. I'm being invited to all kinds of mechinot, pre-army programs to give workshops there. This is now part of the curriculum of training shlichim, of training birthright staff, of all kind of Israel programs in Israel. So like this is starting to become a tool.
I'm so happy to hear that. Like it warms my heart to hear that because and I want to get to comments, which there aren't any right now, which is fine because I can throw all of mine out. Everybody, I know that you've seen it. What I think that the success of this is that it's so entertaining that if you had a comedian who is actually simultaneously has a little bit of a crass sense of humor, but is also very warm-hearted, that it's the right person, and that when you have a person who is experiencing it, that you do have a first-person narrative and not just a camera off sort of a thing. And I didn't ask you, and I also, maybe you can throw this in there, we have a comedian, but do you have a film background specifically? And how did that come about?
I've never done anything on film. I'm a Jewish educator. This was an idea for me. I never thought I'll be in front of the camera as well. That was a decision that was made about 20 minutes before we started filming the first shot of the show. The director came up to me and said, listen, I know we created all kind of monologues for Guli to say before and after that will lead us towards the segment, but we're going to try something a little bit different as well. We're going to put you in front of the camera and you'll be in a dialogue with him. You'll be the expert that walks him through this experience and bounces ideas back and forth with him. And they loved the dynamics between us and loved the.
So you're really a co-star because you're all over the place in this. I love it because we can tell you're like the expert Jew that he gets to ask funny questions with.
But that was really not the original plan. The original plan was that there was intentionality in choosing Guli specifically for this role, also because of his personal narrative and where he was in that point in time in life, but also because Guli is. You might not know this about him, but he's the host of the late night show in Israel. So he's used to interviewing people in a very personable way, where humor is, a spice, but it's not the focus. The focus is whatever this person or the guest wants to talk about, right? So we knew that we wanted that personal human interaction. That's extremely important, that people-to-people element. He's also the son of Israel's most famous storyteller, Yossi Alfi, and Guli knows how to tell a story. And that I felt is extremely, extremely important because really the goal of the show is to tell the narrative of American Jewish life, or narratives. It's not fair to say there isn't one narrative. And I think Guli did an amazing job at it in creating that magic of personal moments and telling the stories. There were a lot of stuff that we filmed in the beginning that never made it into the series because they were too informative. They weren't personable at all. All these, we spent 3 days at the APEC conference, for instance, in Washington, D.C. Not a scene from DC made it. We went to APEC, we interviewed Jeremy Ben-Ami from J Street. We had students from If Not Now that were demonstrating, critically against Israel. We had students that were pro-Israel that were attending the conference, and we talked with all these, we talked with Congressman Ted Deutsch on the Hill. We actually took us into Congress and we interviewed him in Congress. We had all these really interesting materials, to create a show about the political gap between us, but that's not something that it wasn't relatable as much as the segments that eventually made it into the show. And we felt like that's the real magic, and what we really need right now is that people-to-people aspect of the show.
Mm-hmm. I think you chose very well because you touch people more with a human connection and seeing somebody react to something. And I don't praise you for you make all your decisions. I know so much falls to the cutting room floor. And I eventually want to ask you, what do you wish you could have kept in there? But we do finally have some comments. They're mostly comments. I want to read them off to you. Somebody says, I want to compliment Moshe on the music used in the series. It was very well chosen as a character in and of itself. The choices of music add a lot of spirit and fun to the film.
Thank you. I'll be honest, I can't take credit for that. We had an amazing, amazing editor, really.
We'll pass along our best wishes.
No, the editing staff up here, not just, we came back with 100 terabytes of material. And that's a huge amount of material. I don't know if you realize, that's hard disk and hard disk and hard disk of material. And they had to shift through all of this and really choose eventually 3 hours of material. They did an amazing job, and they chose the right sounds, the right music, the right imagery. It was just, they did an amazing job. And
I mean, it sounds like it was so successful that you could potentially take all the stuff that you had to cut and just make a few more episodes and throw them on TV later.
So we offered that to the network and said, hey, let's do 6 episodes. We have enough to create good 6 episodes with a comprehensive rationale for each one of them. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to each one of the episodes. Right. And you could do that with 6. And at the time, the network thought, this is a niche program. There'll be a few nutcases that really love Judaism or really are curious about, and they'll watch it, and it'll be very prestigious and nice, but they didn't expect that this will be such a huge hit. And I think now they regret it. And luckily, we're going to be picked up for a second season. We'll talk about that
Oh
later
my
on.
God. Okay, good. Awesome. I'm so excited to hear that. I just wanted to also just tell you, we've got somebody who says they love the interview with Rabbi Angela Bookdahl, and they love the Central Synagogue of New York City. And I have to say that leads me to point out that the incredible themes and juxtapositions you chose for each episode.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate it, especially, and we'll see it throughout. For those of you who haven't seen episodes 3 and 4, because I imagine seeing the statistics, a lot more people have seen episodes 1 and 2 at this point, being in the middle of the festival, that every episode has a very good thematic central and focus. And the fact that you interviewed this wonderful progressive rabbi, Angela Bookdahl, from the Central Synagogue in New York. And then in the same episode, you have, you have
Ruchi Fryer, Judge Ruchi Fryer, yes.
Who is incredible. And you've got two very, very strong, intelligent, accomplished Jewish women who are leaders in their field and breaking barriers, who are respected and beloved and doing just the most important things, both of them in so many ways. And yet they couldn't be more different one from the other. And yet they are also devoted to their Judaism. And so I just wanted to mention that this was, first of all, beautifully structured, you did well, but I wanted to know what it was like to meet both of these people and conduct some insightful interviews with both of them in such a way, what Guli thought too.
Right, so first of all, I'll say that it was really important for us to make sure that we have a wide spectrum of both political and religious views throughout the series and ethnic backgrounds and gender. Like, we really want to make sure that everyone is featured and finds their voice in the series, not just because we wanted to show that American Jews are diverse, and that's obviously true, but also it's really important for us, for the viewer at home, to say, I find myself in the series, because the whole idea was to create identification and empathy. And if it was just, the Rabbi Bookdahls of the world, which are all amazing, then many more conservative, ultra-Orthodox, conservative with a lowercase c, Israelis would say, I'm lost. Like, this doesn't speak to me at all. We needed to have their voice in the show as well. So we were very intentional about that. We got to Ruchi. It's really interesting because we filmed Angela and our second day of filming, and our first leg, there were 2 legs for the show. One was literally the 2 weeks prior to COVID.
Right, I was gonna ask you, how many
February
trips did you
28th.
make? Right,
So,
okay.
So February 28th until March 8th. Okay, if you all remember, COVID really entered our life on March 15th, approximately. Right, so that was we were joking about COVID during the first round, but as it was progressing, we're oh, this is going to be a serious issue. And when the team made it back to Israel, they were all self-quarantined because it wasn't mandatory at the time, but they were all concerned because we were in some hot spots. And that was Rabbi Bookdahl. And then we got to Ruchi and the second leg after we had that segment already there. And we knew that we needed to find her counterpart for the show. We needed another woman that's strong and and a leader, but something a little bit different.
Was she receptive to the idea of being interviewed for this kind of a project? I mean, she is ultra Orthodox, but
absolutely. We made it very clear. There was a lot of fear in the beginning when we started this project that, again, this will be a Sacha Baron Cohen style show, which we're coming to mock the people that we're interviewing, where we show them in a bad light. And we really, I think my credentials as a Jewish educator and the different organizations that supported the show, the different nonprofits, the Jewish nonprofits and the federations that worked with us on the show, kind of gave us the credentials to say, okay, we're obviously, on the right side of telling this narrative. And so, yes, she was suspicious. And I think if you're sensitive, you can tell that the suspicion is there in the beginning of that segment when we're going to her house, and she's like, what's going on here? Who is this person? She's asking these kind of questions. But one of the wonderful things that Gul is able to do is he's able to diffuse that very quickly with all the people that we interviews and create a very, intimate setting. But when we interviewed Rabbi Bookdahl, we didn't anticipate that she's going to tell us her personal story. That was not what the interview was about. We were there to talk about issues of religion and state, right? We were still very much in that informative phase of the series where we said, okay, we're going to show, you know, what's important for American Jews. How do they practice their Judaism? And it's very like thematic. And then she brought us like straight off the bat her personal story when she was 16 in Israel, and you know, and she felt like an outsider and nobody accepted her as a Jew. And in many ways, that's an allegory or a representation of how Israelis relate to Reform Jews as a movement, right? This delegitimization. It's late at night for me here. I'm sorry, guys. It's a long word. But yeah, right? And the fact that Israelis would say, well, all Reform Jews are not authentic enough, are not Jewish enough. And so that was a wonderful representation of what we were trying to say. And it was one of those moments that made us realize, yeah, the show is all about relationships. It's all about people to people. It's all between the magic between Guli and Angela and Guli and everyone else in interviews, not about talking about the talking points of the lack of religious freedom in Israel versus religious pluralism in America.
Yeah, and you're going back to the central, every episode in between everything comes back to, the fact that Israel shouldn't necessarily have a monopoly on Judaism. And that, people in America can love their Judaism in small ways. You can be culturally Jewish, and that's beautiful. And, we have Haredim on your show, and we have people who are, I don't know, reading Torah in the mountains outside in the snow. And I just want to make sure that I get to some of these questions. We do have a couple of things about Colorado. How did you find this small Colorado town? And somebody says that it was a very moving bar mitzvah. I mean, and I want to expand that question as well as I'm sure that because you, as your experience as a shaliach and an educator across culturally, you had these contacts, but it must have been a massive logistical nightmare to plan and research, get to places, but identify the people. So first of all, Colorado, people loved it there. Tell us a little bit about that, and also about how you were able to schedule it and create this structure.
Right, so I'll start off with saying that we researched around 150 different items for the show. Different people or institutions or events that take place. Obviously, many of them did not make it into the show just because we had to shift through them, and many of them didn't happen because of COVID. So COVID really threw a wrench in all of our plans. Like, we obviously were planning on going to a Jewish summer camp. That's kind of like a must that to expose to Israelis. And unfortunately, there was no summer camps that summer.
Can it be in the next series, by the way?
So we'll talk about the next series, the next season.
Okay, sorry. It's important.
But Jewish summer camp is extremely, is one of those amazing moments that, and amazing communities and a great way to engage young American Jews. And we couldn't, feature that. There were other places we were supposed to go to Whitefish, Montana, which is a small town that suffered a huge incident of anti-Semitism. It's really interesting. And some other, we're planning on going down south to Alabama and Mississippi and show Southern Jews, which the series right now is lacking. I think it's extremely important to see Jews living in those small Jewish communities down south. Colorado kind of filled that gap in many ways. And how did we get to Colorado? So I told you that I've been a Jewish educator for many years, and I spent many years as an emissary. 3 of the 16 summers that I spent on Jewish summer camps as a shaliach, as an emissary from Israel, were spent in Camp Ramah in the Rockies. It's an outdoor adventure camp. During my summers there, I got to explore Jewish life in Colorado. And I loved it. I loved everything about it. The Backcountry Bites, that small Jewish community in Frisco, Colorado, is an initiative of alumni of this Jewish summer camp, which basically said, we want to have, most of them grew up conservative. We don't identify anymore with the religious establishment, with the institutions. We don't need a rabbi necessarily. We're ski bums. That's what we like to do right now. How do we form a community that speaks to us? That's autonomous, that we don't want to pay membership. We don't have the money to pay membership. And so they kind of started this ski lodge / Jewish community in Frisco for all the staffs, and it's very close to Breckenridge, if you know the area. It's a big ski town, And so I knew about it just from my connection, my personal connections with Camp Ramah and the Iraqis. The Adventure Rabbi, which I agree is one of the most moving moments of the entire series, especially for Guli. He likes to talk about it as much as one of those tipping points for him, where he realized that he's a comedian that's creating a show about relationships and not that comedy that he thought he's going to be making to begin with. And it was a really emotional moment for him, this bar mitzvah, very emotional. We got to her like 3 days before we filmed the segment. It's like, we knew that we're flying out to Colorado. We had something else that was planned that kind of backfired. And we said, like, what's out there? And somehow, we just started to research the hell out of what's going on in Jewish in Colorado. And we found Rabbi Jamie, the Adventure Rabbi. And she was just such a good sport. She said, yeah, come along. And she organized this excursion.
A bar mitzvah in 3 days instead of.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't catered, right? It wasn't catering,
yeah.
and there wasn't any of the real preparation there. But she was able to get the group to come out with us into nature and really do this really emotional, meaningful moment for Guli. So it's definitely one of our most favorite segments and definitely one of the most impactful ones on the Israeli public. They really loved it, like this opportunity, like, oh, maybe we could think differently about how we celebrate our Judaism.
I mean, that image of taking a Torah scroll outside.
Out of the backpack. Yeah,
in a backpack. And I mean, I would be so curious to see what more, religiously conservative people thought of that. Because the fact is, like, do you prefer people not have a relationship with Judaism at all? Or do this thing, just out?
Yes, but it's not for us, I think what we try to show in this series as well is that it's not it's not an aftermath. It's not, it's afterthought. It's not like, oh, well, it would be wonderful if they made it to Shul, but they're not going to do that. So that's it. Like, that's maybe the Adventure Rabbi's piece. But for us, this should be an opportunity, an option for people to begin with. Like, yeah, who said that you need to celebrate Judaism in a synagogue, paying membership, dressing up in a suit and showing up at 9:30 a.m. Maybe you could do it differently. And that's kind of like the segments that we filmed in Colorado specifically. There's something about, I guess, that state that allows us freedom and creativity. Between the Backcountry Bite is another one of them, and even the AE Pi fraternity, which is one of our favorite segments.
It looked like Guli was having so much fun eating pizza in that fraternity.
It was lots of fun. It was a little troubling, I'll be honest.
Really? Why? How so?
I mean, first of all, again, the amount of drugs and alcohol that were in there were a little troubling. I'll be honest. And there was something about the lack of literacy, lack of the Jewish literacy that these young students have, that was a little troubling for all of us. It was like,
But what's interesting though is that they still came together. Like, for some reason, it was important for them to have a Jewish fraternity. They knew nothing about it, but they knew that was important enough to join together.
And that was the big takeaway for us from the show, because that's also like that short closing monologue that Guli has for that specific segment, is that even in this place, even in this setting, in this location, Jews, are proud of their Judaism and are able to celebrate it in their own way, in a cultural way. Like, there's so many wonderful things that came up in that segment. The fact that, they respect their Jewish grandmother, that they love Jewish food. And the most important thing, that they like Israel. They've been on Birthright, that, even though they still think that's the Israeli-Pakistani conflict, they still care about Israel in some way. And the most important thing is that they care about their Jewish community. Like, they want to hang out with other Jews their age. Mm-hmm. Like, there's something about this sense of belonging that's really, really powerful. And the big takeaway for us is that even in this setting, which is supposedly like the most American foreign setting for us Israelis, like when Israelis think about American culture, Greek culture is like the representation of something that's like so American. Yeah.
I guess from that story and how wild some of these experiences are, I wanted to know, and I know that he's not here with us with Guli, but from your observing him, what do you think were the most sort of moving, and I know that there's a lot of filming here, do you know one or two or three most pivotal moments, and what do you think he really learned or was transformed by in this process? Were there some things that really stood out?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We've done a lot of these conversations already, so I do know
Yeah.
what Guli's. So the bar mitzvah moment is extremely meaningful for him. Again, it wasn't planned. He thought it was going to be a kick. It's going to be really funny. He didn't expect it to be emotional at all, and it ended up being one of those moments. Another one of the peaks for him. I mean, you mentioned Rabbi Buchdahl, actually, which is just the most amazing, individual. The Kabbalat Shabbat service that we did at Romemu was very foreign for him in many ways. Again, church, I mean, it was kind of like pushing the limits of religious pluralism that Israelis could accept. But there, and he wasn't used to going to Friday night services, and yet he experiences this, very amazing moment that he really felt at home there. He wasn't lying when he said that he felt at home in that segment. I'll mention maybe one or two more aha moment that we had. I think all of us in the staff was when we related to the Jews of color, which is a topic that, I mean, to say there's racism in Israel, that's not as if there's no racial racism in Israel.
I would happen to say that it's probably even more acute than here in some ways, and that it isn't
Really?
identified. Yeah.
I'm not sure about that. I think the way we relate it, we talk about it is very, very different. After 400 years of slavery in North America, I don't know. The history here is.
I think
very
the Jews in Israel think themselves to be above racism if they're all Jewish, and you see that within Judaism with different people of different colors and different, Mizrahim, Ashkenazim, and all of that. There's a lot of tension.
Absolutely, and yet they still like we like to say that we don't see color in Israel. It's all, we're all Jews. What does it mean? What do you mean? I don't care if you're Ethiopian or Mizrahi or whatever. The reality is that it makes a huge difference. I also think that in many ways, we have other tensions with other, people around us that kind of take divert the conversation to something that's very, very different. But having that conversation on race in America and internally within the Jewish community was something that, for me, after living in America for the past 6 years and seeing the conversation that's being held right now among American Jews, I felt an obligation to bring that to the Israeli viewers, even though, it's something that's a little foreign to us as Israelis. And that was definitely an aha moment for
the Jews of color.
Yes.
And I think that, and I know, thank goodness you've got another series, and I want in a minute to ask you about that. That one of the topics that I had wished that there was more attention brought to, when you talk about, there's so much about Jews by choice and how you choose to observe and how you identify yourself, of actual conversions. Now we have a lot of people that have converted. A couple of the Jews of color really came into it themselves as a decision as adults. And we have Rabbi Buchdahl, whose mother is not Jewish. And then, of course, at the very end, the young couple who makes Aliyah, the woman very casually drops that she was converted as a baby. And that she was adopted, and you don't really delve in there. But in Israel, we have the whole, are you Jewish enough? And that there is the law of return, and then there is being halachically Jewish. And I just wanted to throw that out there in terms of the Israeli public doesn't seem to necessarily care as much as we do in the States when we do go over, and just like Rabbi Buchdahl when she was 16, are told that you are not Jewish when you come to Israel, or what that experience is. There are many more converts to Judaism in the diaspora as there are in Israel. So I just wanted to mention that.
It's a subtle theme that I'm glad that you picked up on. It's definitely something we, it wasn't intentional necessarily. I think it is very interesting to see, Jews in America are a minority. They're constantly interacting with non-Jews around them, and non-Jews both impact Judaism in America and also join Judaism in America. Like it's a porous relationship. It's not as if there's clear borders. And so I think it's represented in a very realistic way in the show.
Yeah.
And we wanted to raise those questions as well, the questions of borders, the questions of where do we draw the line? Who's inside and who's outside of this club, as Guli likes to call it.
Yeah. let me just look at the comments. We have, oh, Sandy says Sonoma County, specifically Sebastopol, has a very large collective of Israeli expats that meet regularly and support each other. They call themselves Israelis Anonymous. So feel free to come over our way if
Thank
you'd
you.
like.
So, but note, just notice that we actually do not feature Israeli Americans in the show at all. And that's intentional as well.
The Persian, which there's a little bit of crossover. I sometimes feel like there are communities, just knowing that I have an Israeli mother, but a lot of her friends were people who were maybe from Romania or Hungary or from Iraq, who like spent a few years as teenagers in Israel and then came to the States. And so they were sort of honorary half Israelis or whatever it was, that there is this immigrant mentality. Who is Israeli enough also happens to be a question. My own mother is on the call now and commenting a little bit. And we always used to say, you know, why she hasn't integrated more into our culture here in the United States. She's literally spent something like 46 years in the United States and left Israel when she was 23. And yet she's still so Israeli. And so there's something that you don't let go of.
The reason why we chose the Persian Jews was because we were looking for a demographic, first of all, to show the diversity of American Jewish life in general, that it's not just Ashkenazi and white and whatnot. But we accomplished that also with the segment of the Jews of color. We didn't have to do the Persian Jews, but we did want to talk about this experience of being an immigrant to North America. Now, most American Jews, Ashkenazi, 85% of the Ashkenazi Jews moving to North America, we don't have that experience. It's our great-grandparents that have that experience. Right, we're third, fourth, maybe even fifth generations North American, and that experience is part of the narrative that we tell of being the ultimate outsiders that came to this golden Medina and were able to make it succeed and achieve the American dream, and become part of the American culture, and become more than that, just become part, but become the storytellers of the American narrative, right? Be it Hollywood or politics or whatnot, or journalism, but it's not an experience that's actually lived right now. That's an experience that's told. And the Persian Jewish community is a community that's literally in that right now in that seam between the ones who came and the first generation that was born here already. And that tension between those two generations was, I felt, something really important to stress, because it explains about like how the general culture around us impacts, Jewish identity, impacts identity in general. Like, what does it mean to be a minority and coming to a new land and taking in this new culture?
It's interesting. I think that I don't have the statistic correct, but I feel like I've heard that in Los Angeles, we have the largest community of Israelis outside of Israel. And I'm wondering if there is merit in your next series to talk to Israelis who have left, this concept of Yoldim, and what their perception of having spent years outside of Israel, being both Israeli secularly or religiously, and being in a place that is not.
Yeah, so I'll just say the reason why we did not feature Israeli Americans was because we didn't want to divert the conversation to someplace a little bit different. Israelis become very, very defensive in a potentially very aggressive way of like, how dare you leave Israel? How dare you, right? Like, you're basically abandoning the dream and the narrative and everything that we hold true about where Jewish future is going to be. And it's very emotional because suddenly it's us, right? And we kind of wanted to. We only were given 4 episodes to begin with, and we said, you know what? If we dedicate time to Israelis, then we're dedicating less time to American Jews. And what we really want to do is we're going to introduce the people to like things that are important to know about American Jews. So that was the reason behind it. Yes, we are going to feature Israelis abroad in our second season, but that second season is not going to be in North America.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Just a couple more questions before I totally want to let you give your spiel.
Sure. Yeah,
I wanted to know how much of this, and I'm sure that it was probably 90+% was planned, but I wanted to know if there was any of this that was organic. We have a question here, was it planned or did it just evolve? Like, were there any things just sprung up? And what comes to mind for me is the dating app. For all of you who haven't gotten to that episode yet, you literally download a dating app and Guli goes on a date with a girl, and Guli has been happily married for decades. And I was
Married
just
to his high
wondering,
school
like,
sweetheart. He never
yes.
dated anyone else.
So it's a question of like that specifically, and in general, like, were there any, like, we call it serendipity, like happy accidents, or that ended up in the film that were really useful or interesting?
Yeah, the blind date is definitely one of them. That really was a surprise for Guli. He was not aware this is going to happen at all. We kind of worked on that like 3 days before. We kind of
Oh,
set it
okay.
up. Yeah, it wasn't a blind date that was set up literally. He played the app.
Okay, I was really scared that this woman did not know
Oh,
that
no, no,
what
no,
was
no.
going on.
She knew what she's going into, but she knew about it like 72 hours in advance.
Okay.
And we did the whole thing with the app as if it's,
Okay.
so we set it up like that. So it was planned to that effect. We had this, a scene that didn't make it into the series eventually was a demonstration of students critical of Israel from an organization named If Not Now. They ended up demonstrating in the APEC conference. They got kicked out, obviously. We ran after them and filmed them outside. That was really interesting. We filmed another segment in DC, which didn't make it into the show, which is the more pro-Israel students on campus setting up like a tabling event. And we ended up having a group of pro-Palestinian students come and like throw a whole shenanigan over there. I don't know what the word I'm looking for there, but like, they kind of like try to disturb there, which was interesting. None of these things actually made it into the show just because, again, they weren't like, they were interesting on an intellectual level, on a like observance level, like, oh, this is interesting to see this happening. But we realized that that's not the language of the series. It's more about experiencing it and relating to it. And it wasn't relatable in any way. So that's why those things came out. I'm trying to think if there's any other big surprises. We found the immigrants coming to Israel, the Olim from the last segment. We kind of recruited them like 2 weeks before. Like we were like, who's getting on that plane? Let's go through the profiles.
Right.
Let's find the people who are willing to be on film as they're literally making the most important decision of their life and, deciding to move to a new country. So a lot of them were very much like last minute, but nothing was like totally like just happened and made it up on camera.
Mm-hmm. So before I, extol your many, many virtues again and summarize this, I wanted to let you tell us what you're working on now, both film-wise with the series and personally, if you'd like to. Sure. Please, we'd love to know.
Sure. So the series, like I said, made a big splash in Israel. Right now, we're using it as an educational tool, creating a lot of different workshops for soldiers, for pre-army, for Hillels in Israel. We said the formal school system. So how do we use the series as a text to talk about the Jewish people, to talk about our relationship, to talk about our common, our common destiny and our joint future? And there's a lot of programming going on there as well. I'm currently speaking to you from New York City. We just arrived here yesterday. We're coming on a tour across North America to show the series in different synagogues. I came to you after spending an amazing hour and a half with Rabbi Bookdal at Central Synagogue in a program that she put in.
Oh, wow, you were just with her. That's so great.
There, and with Rabbi David Ingber from the third episode from Roman. We had a joint panel, Guli, the two of them, and myself, and it was a very powerful experience again. So we're trying to bring the show to America and make sure that it's open for the public and streaming. And if anyone here has any, I don't know, a cousin on Netflix, please let us know. We would love to pick your brain on how to make it happen. So that's when it comes to this season. When it comes to the future, we realize that we have an opportunity here to kind of create a anthology of Jewish life in the 21st century. Like, what does it mean to be a Jew nowadays? Anywhere. So we started off with America, which made a lot of sense. But the reality is that the Jews have a very different experience in other places. And so the next place that we want to explore are countries that are very much represent the Holocaust. So Hungary, Poland, Ukraine, and Germany. Those are probably the 4 countries that when you think about the Holocaust, they come to mind. Obviously, there's others, the Czech Republic and Lithuania, like you go to all that area, but these are the countries where suffered, that's had the most like huge demographic shift and like the terrible stories that we can think about take place in these countries. And we want to show the Israeli public, which kind of has this misconception that Jewish life in these countries came to an end during the war. We want to show them that conception is wrong. That actually these are the countries that currently are the center for the inspiration for Jewish renewal in the world today. I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on nowadays in places like Budapest or Krakow or Odessa, but there's unbelievable like Jewish renewal going on there that's fascinating and so different than what we know in America. In America, it's still very much institutionalized and very much religious in its language. But these countries, came out of the Iron Curtain 20, 30 years ago. Judaism was not a religion that you were allowed to practice in those countries for so long. So what does it mean to be Jewish in a place like Budapest? Like, and culture plays such a huge role nowadays in defining what does Jewish look like in these countries. So it's going to be very, very different, really out of the box. So many amazing things that are going out there I find very inspiring. And again, we're hoping to start filming that in a couple of months. We want to do a session during the end of winter, beginning of spring, and one in the summer, and hopefully air the next season towards the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. It's going to be very similar in its format, anywhere between 4 to 6 episodes, but very, very exciting. And I think American Jews will find it entertaining and enlightening as well.
I think so too. That sounds incredible to me. And I just want you to know that we would love to support you. We love this show and are very much looking forward to your upcoming work. And we do have a couple of things. I don't think we can get to them, but I want you to know that we have had people here say that they were so glad they got to see it because they learned as well about Jewish things that we had no idea about here in our own country, as well as seeing ourselves in it. I found it to be educational and very entertaining. And I kind of wanted to just say thank you that, like, gosh, if Israelis got even 30% of this, then they know a little bit more about who I am. And it's not just America that has to learn about Israel all the time. And then we have somebody saying here, do you ever think to talk about Jews, non-Jews on their opinions of Israel, as in the rise of anti-Semitism that Israelis in Israel are unaware of?
It's a fascinating topic. I totally agree. And if I had, if I was given, 13 episodes to do a series about the state of, Judaism, the Jewish community in America today, I would definitely include that angle. I think it's extremely important. American Jews are first and foremost American, and therefore it's really important to understand that context of how Judaism is being perceived by non-Jews in America, how Israel is being perceived right now by non-Jews in America. Those are all really important questions and could make for a fascinating series. Unfortunately, because we had a limited amount of resources and time, we really wanted to focus on those key questions. Again, like the question of choice is fundamental in our understanding the difference between us. The question of, where do we belong? Where's home for us is a key question. The question of how do you ensure the next generation or people who are less affiliated still belong to the tribe, still want to subscribe to this concept of being Jewish? That's a key question. And all these wonderful ideas that you're suggesting, I think, are a different level. They're more nuanced. They're add-ons. And if I had that ability to do it, absolutely. But
I have to say that I wish for you to one day very soon have that ability, because I think that Israel's prime television studio needs to hire you. And I'm shouting out to the consulate to help you get the resources to make these films, because I think that honestly, you're in a position with your background of having your foot in two sides of the world, and how just very intellectually curious that you personally seem to be about all of these things, and are able to translate them to us through your research, finding just an incredible comedian, and the structure and the logistics it took to create this series. And so thank
you very much, but I have to give a shout out to the team that worked on the show. This is not a one-man show. Really, we had the most professional team that we could ask for under the circumstances, and it's a joint effort.
Yeah,
And I want to say, like, I want to give the Guli a lot of credit as well. Specifically, it's not a given that a comedian, an A-lister TV personality in Israel would risk his career creating a TV show like this. And it was a risk. It's,
And
this could have been a huge
it
bust.
paid off
It
big
wasn't
time.
huge.
It
Yes.
really did. And we're coming up to an hour right now. So I just wanted to thank you. I want to tell everybody who's on the call, if you haven't seen all 4 episodes, see all 4 episodes, please. Tell all of your friends to do so. There's about another 10 days to do it. And we really do need your support for the film festival and this film. There's a reason that this film festival is as robust and long living as it is in our 26th season right now, because we really do try to find really special things that I think would be important and significant for us and the people we know to experience. I know that it fascinated me. I felt really proud that this existed. I think people who are in interfaith relationships, people who have a lot of non-Jewish friends, people who live in areas that might not actually have a lot of Jews living there. I think that in a lot of contexts, you have hit the nail on the head in so many different ways that each of us, and we have, let me tell you, a lot of non-Jewish viewers of our festival who said that this was wonderful, that they learned so much about us. And so from all of us in Sonoma County at the Sonoma County Jewish Film Festival, and I'm hoping the whole wide world thanks you for creating something that I honestly believe was wonderful. And we've got a whole bunch of thank yous pouring in. And so on behalf of everyone, thank you. And thank you for coming and speaking with us tonight. And with that, we sign off. Thank you, everybody.